Yo, what's going on with y'all boys, man? So today we gonna be talking about the UFC card that's tomorrow for the main event. We got Corey Sandhagen versus Umar Nurmagomedov. Now, this whole card is actually pretty decent. Not gonna lie, the main card is actually really good. I'm looking forward to the main card. The prelims aren't too bad, but we're just gonna be talking about every fight that's gonna be happening tomorrow. So, first things first, we're just gonna hop in. Dumas versus Dennis. So Dumas, he is 9-2, 2-2 in the UFC. Dennis, 11-9. Dennis is 1-4 in the UFC. Now, first things first, we're gonna talk about Dumas. Dumas is actually pretty good. I've seen him fight once before. It wasn't in the UFC though. It was in bare knuckle MMA and Jorge Masvidal's fighting championship. But since he's been in the UFC, Dumas has a W over Cody Brundage. Well, he lost his last fight to KO in round 1 and also lost to submission in 2023. But that being said, Dennis, he really has no notable wins over anybody. And he also lost to Ikram and Brave due to submission. He also lost last 3 fights, 2 by KO and 1 by submission. And he's been pro since 2013, so he might have a lot of experience on Dumas. But all that being said, for this fight, I'm going to take Dumas. Next up, we got Jai Herbert versus Rolando. So first, Jai is 2-4 in the UFC, 12-5 and 1 overall in all his fights. Rolando is 14-3 and 0-2 in the UFC. Both of their last fights were losses. And I'm just gonna point this out before I start getting into all like the people they fought and shit. Jai Herbert is 6'1" in the lightweight division. That is insanity. And he's fighting a dude that's 5'11". His reach is also 3 inches longer. But they do have the same leg reach, which is interesting. But Jai Herbert, he was actually champ in Cage Warriors. He also fought Ilya in 2022, which he lost in the second round. But other than that, he really has no notable wins. Rolando, he was champ in the FFC. He never lost by KO or submission. He's only lost by decision. And he also has no notable wins against anybody. But all that being said, I'm going to take Jai Herbert. Next up, we got Victoria. I'm not even going to try to pronounce her last name. Versus Sam Hughes. Now, this fight I'm actually kind of looking forward to, only because of Victoria and how she's undefeated. And they are the same height. Victoria does have longer reach and longer leg reach, only by an inch though, but this one's by 3. So that's a plus. But Victoria, as I said, she is undefeated with an 8-0 record. She's only had 2 fights in the UFC. And Sam Hughes, she's 8-6, which is fucking outrageous. 3-5 in the UFC. I don't know how she's in the UFC. But Victoria, she has a mostly wrestling and jiu-jitsu base. Most of her wins are by submission. I don't think she has any KO wins. But she doesn't really have any notable wins over anybody in the UFC since she's only had 2 fights. But Sam Hughes, straight ass. I got Victoria on this fight. Next up, we got Garam versus Jordan. Now, Garam is 12-4, but 1-2 in the UFC, and Jordan is 13-7, and this is actually his debut fight in the UFC. Now, Garam, he did lose his last fight by KO, so it'll be interesting how he comes out this fight, see what he does differently. But other than that, he has no notable wins over anybody that I could see. But Jordan, as I said, it's his debut. He won his last 4 fights by submission. And he was also champ in Cage Warriors. But I mean, he doesn't really have any notable wins since this is his debut in the UFC. But I'm excited to see what he can do. Next up, we got the big boys. You already know. But we got Shamil Gaziev versus Dontel Myers. Think that's how you pronounce the last name? Not 100%. But Shamil is 12-1, 2-1 in the UFC. Dontel is 11-6, 4-4 and 1 in the UFC. Shamil, he's actually not a bad fighter. He did lose his last fight. He did lose his last fight to Rosenstrike in the 4th, which I think is just because he gassed out. I haven't watched the fight. I probably will watch the fight after this, but it was the main event. So he has been in the main event, but I don't know why they pushed him down to the prelims. I feel like he could have had somebody better than Donzel. But I mean, this is a good fight for both of these guys just to see what they're all about. And Shamil also only has one decision on the record, which is kind of insane. So all of his fights come by finish, including him. Now moving on to Donzel. He was a champ in HFC. He fought Muhammad Usman, which is Kamaru Usman's brother, and he won by decision. But he also lost to Nascimento twice, and he also lost to Cyril Gane, which, I mean, who hasn't lost to Cyril Gane besides John Jones, you know? And also, some notable things to take in. Donzel has an 8 that is a lot of inches. He also has two inches on him in height, which I don't think is going to matter because Shamil is just going to take him down instantly. If Shamil does strike with him and somehow knocks him out, I would be shocked, not gonna lie. But all that being said, I got Shamil winning. Next up for your boys, we got Muhammad Yahya versus Fernandez. Don't know how to say his first name, not gonna lie. But with Muhammad, he is 12-4, 0-1 in the UFC. He lost his last fight against Trevor Peek, which is kind of embarrassing, not gonna lie. He was a champ in UAE Warriors. But, like, other than being champ, he really has no notable wins over anybody. Only because this is his second fight in the UFC. So he still has time. But up next, we got Fernandez. He was champ in Judo Brazil. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I don't know what the fuck that is. But he was champ in it. He's also 8-2, 0-1 in the UFC. So, depending on who wins this will be their first win in the UFC. But, yeah, not much more to say about this fight either. Now we got another big boy matchup. We got Azamat versus Alonzo Menifield. Now, Azamat, he is 13-0, 3-0 in the UFC. And he's beat pretty good guys. I mean, he beat Dustin Jacoby. He's knocked out a lot of the people he's fought. And he also has a 10-second knockout outside of the UFC. Now, that being said, it is the UFC, so like these guys are gonna be a lot better. Alonzo Menifield is a really good guy. He's a really good fighter. I mean, shit. And also another thing to point out, the height differential on these guys, 3 inches. Now, that doesn't seem like a lot, but in the octagon, that is gonna be a lot. And that's not the only thing. Look at this reach, 4.5 inches. That is insanity. But that being said, the leg reach is the same. So if they do, which I think they will, stand and bang, then if Azamat throws leg kicks and Alonzo throws leg kicks, then I mean they're just gonna be in the same distance of each other. That means Azamat is actually gonna be able to hit him. But if Alonzo stays out of range of his leg kicks, which I don't know if he throws any leg kicks, I haven't seen him fight before. But if he does, then Alonzo is going to have a field day because of that reach. But now we're going to talk about Alonzo's record and whatnot. So he is 15-4-1, and he's 9-4-1 in the UFC. He's beat some pretty decent guys. He beat Dustin Jacoby, but he did lose to Carlos Alberg in 12 seconds, which, I mean, that sucks. He had a draw with Jimmy Crute and also had a rematch with him and won, so that's good. That's not much more to say about these guys either. But I got Azamat winning this one. Also, don't know if I said it last time, but I got Muhammad winning this one. Alright, next up we got Mackenzie Dern versus Loopy. What a funny name, I can't lie. So Mackenzie Dern, she is 13-5 and 8-4 in the UFC. She's beat quite a few people in the UFC, not gonna lie. She beat Angela Hill, Averna, and Tisha Pennington. No, Verna, I know it's Verna, dude. I mean, she did lose her, or Verna did win her last fight though, and Tisha Pennington, that's a good fight. But all that being said, Mackenzie Dern did lose to Jessica Andrade, and not even did she lose, she got fucking dominated, dude. Like whenever I would say I would dominate Mackenzie Dern, that's what Jessica Andrade did with her lesbian ass. She dominated Mackenzie Dern like she wanted to fuck her. I swear to God. All that being said, Loopy, she's 12-4, 2-4 in the UFC. She lost to Angela Hill and Verna, which Mackenzie Dern beat. So, I mean, MMA math says Mackenzie Dern's gonna win. There also isn't any odds on this fight, which I probably should have looked at the odds on the other fights. But this is, I don't know, this is a good fight. Because Mackenzie Dern has a 2-inch reach advantage and a 1.5-inch reach advantage in the legs and a 2-inch reach advantage in the height. But all that being said, I got Mackenzie Dern winning this one. Yo guys, I'm actually currently recording this part after the fights only because my recordings for the rest of the main card after Mackenzie Dern and Loopy got fucking corrupted. So now I have to re-record and say everything I was going to say and say my picks, which I actually got all the main card right. And I have notes from the other day, and I can put those in the video. I probably won't, but now I'm just gonna say everything I have to say about the rest of the main card. Alright, so first things first, Tony Ferguson, 40 years old. Now, I shouldn't have to explain why that's a big deal. Most fighters' primes are 35. Keep that in mind. He is 40 years old. Now, Tony, he's 26-10 and 14-8 in the UFC. Now, he has beat so many good people. He beat Donald Cerrone, Anthony Pettis, Kevin Lee, RDA, Edson Barboza. But dude, he has big losses too. Like, he got brutally knocked out by Michael Chandler. And this isn't a big loss, but he got beat by Beneil Dariush. Now, Beneil has gotten better. I will say that. And whenever he fought Tony, he looked really good. And also, whenever Tony fought Charles Oliveira almost broke his arm. I don't know why Tony didn't tap to that, because he still lost. But, I mean, Tony, like, what are you doing, man? He just needs to retire, dude. It's Tony he needs to retire. But in his fight, because since this is after the fights, he did put one glove in the octagon, so like he doesn't want to retire, but he knows it's coming. And he's on an 8-fight lose streak now. I had on the notes that it was a 7-fight lose streak, but it is an 8-fight lose streak now. Come on, Tony. But all right, Michael Chiesa. He's 18-7, 10-7 in the UFC. He's lost to Jorge Masvidal, Kevin Lee, Anthony Pettis, Vincent Luque, Sean Brady, and Kevin Holland. So those are all pretty good guys. The only one that's like pretty iffy is Sean Brady and Vincent Luque, but all the other ones are pretty good guys. Now, he did beat Jim Miller, Beneil Dariush, RDA, and Neil Magny. And the best names on there are probably Jim Miller and RDA, and Beneil Dariush and Neil Magny. Like, they're just those guys are like the guys that if you beat, then you'll be like a top contender at that point, really. But for this fight, I did have Chiesa, which now that we all know, he did win in the first round by submission. But yeah, it was a sad fight. Up next, we got Cheeto versus Figgy. Now, for this fight, I did have Figgy winning. I'm just going to get that out there. first things first. Now, Cheeto, he is 23-9-1, 15-9 in the UFC. So all of his losses did come from UFC fighters. But Cheeto is a really good fucking guy. He beat Frankie Saenz, who beat Marab, and he also beat Dominic Cruz and Rob Font and Frankie Edgar. Now, those are huge names. He did lose to Corey Sandhagen and Jose Aldo, but I mean, it's fucking Jose Aldo and Corey Sandhagen. I mean, come on now. But Cheeto, he is a great striker. Actually, I won't say that because he did lose to Sean, but Sean is levels above any striker in the UFC, in my opinion. But he is a really good striker. Now, Figgy, 23-3-1, 12-3-1 in the UFC. He was champ. He defended the belt 3 times. He beat Alex Perez and Joseph Benavidez, Rob Font and Cody Garbrandt, and Pantoja. Now, this was his third fight in bantamweight, which now we know that he did win. So, I mean, now Figgy is in the title fight talk. So that will be interesting. Now, just looking at these stats, they're kind of crazy because Figgy did knock down Cheeto, which is kind of crazy because Sean couldn't do that. And Cheeto did have more significant strikes, and he also had more total strikes, which is interesting. But like I said, I did have Figgy for this one, and he ended up pulling through. Next up, we had the fucking Dagestanian striker, Nurmagomedov. This dude, I absolutely love him, bro. Like, his first fight in the UFC, I was on it. Like, it was early in the morning, too, because it was a UFC Abu Dhabi fight. So, I was watching that early in the morning, which was awesome. Now, he is 13-0, 2-0 in the UFC. I've seen both of those fights, and he did pretty good in the first one. The second one was a little iffy, and but he did really good in this one. His wrestling does need work though, which is funny because he's from Dagestan. But he had a decision over Bruno Silva and won, obviously. He's only had 2 decisions in his career, and one of them was in a UFC fight. And he likes his knees and elbows, which I'm sure everybody knows that. I did have Sharbullet for this fight as well. Now, Michael, I think that's how you pronounce his name. I honestly forgot. He's 19-8, 7-6 in the UFC. He had a fight with Khalil Roundtree, which ended up in a no contest. He lost to Jimmy Crute, Dustin Jacoby, Kevin Holland, and Michael Pereira. So he lost to all the big names in middleweight. So he did lose to quite a few big names in middleweight. But he does have wins against Cody Brundage and Smiling Sam Alvey. I mean, Sam Alvey is a karate combat champion, guys. Come on. Like, he beat him. All that being said, I did have Sharbullet winning this fight. Now, for our main event, Corey Sandhagen versus Umar Nurmagomedov. Now, Corey, great guy. Love him. He was 17-4, 10-3 in the UFC at the time of this. I mean, he's 10-4 now, but yeah, we don't gotta talk about that. But let's talk about all of his other fights. Now, he did lose to Aljamain by submission, which before my recordings got corrupted, I thought would be a problem because I thought Umar would submit him, which we know now that did not happen. But he did get wrestlefucked, which he said specifically in the pre-fight press conference that his defensive wrestling is a lot better than people think it is. Which I will say, Umar did only get 5 out of 13 takedowns, which is pretty impressive for Corey. It's kind of sad for Umar knowing that he's Russian and everything. But Corey's fights, I mean, he beat Mario Batista by submission, Frankie Edgar by flying knee. That is one of his biggest knockouts. He beat Song Yadong by doctor stoppage. Song Yadong's a really good guy. He beat Cheeto by decision and Rob Font by decision. So all those guys, really good guys. But Umar's had a very, very interesting history with fighting and different championships. Now, he fought in 4 different companies. He went to the PFL, and then he fought in 2 other companies. He fought in the PFL again, and then fought again in 1 more company, and then he won a belt in that company. And he also won a belt in another company before that. And I mean, he really hasn't fought anybody that good in the UFC before this. So this was his biggest fight yet. But I mean, he proved himself with this fight, really. I mean, it was a challenge for him. He did really good though for it being Corey Sandhagen. I mean, he had 123 strikes against a striker. That is insane. But I will say, the 5 for 13 takedowns is kind of nuts since he's from Russia. And for this fight, I did have Umar winning, and he pulled through. So, yeah, guys, that was all my picks for the UFC card. I was trying to put this video up before the card, but I had a bunch of problems with all the files getting corrupted and whatnot, so had to put it out a little late. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next video.